Hello, everyone. My name's Ashley Fulmer. I am the science coordinator for Riverside Unified, and I get the pleasure to facilitate this breakout session with Maria. So, do you want to introduce yourself, Maria?
Oh, hi, I'm Maria, and I work at UC Riverside, and I work also for the California Science Project, and I'm glad to be here with you today. And it's always a pleasure to work with the Exploratorium.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. And on a side note, I have a first grader, so I was very excited to help facilitate the first grade room because I'm becoming like a first grade teacher. So like when Lynn was talking about certain things, I was pulling out the Wonders book and I was like, oh yeah, we could totally talking about setting character and events, because that was something he just did today with one of the stories. So just very appropriate. So I will share my screen. Maria, did you want to start or say anything else?
No, go ahead. So I see what slides are you, because I think one part that really excites me of doing science is that the type of text that scientists have to interact with are many. So it's not just the text from a book, but a video becomes a text, a table becomes a text, a diagram becomes a text. So when we are trying to practice the name it, verb it, and finish it, you have so many opportunity to draw from their experiences. So what we are thinking now is how are we going to help our students to make really more polished type of writing that would be published in a scientific publication, for instance. So is there anybody of you familiar with the name it, verb it, finish it? Or are you using any other type of strategies for writing an argument, for helping students write an argument? And not in science, even in from your materials from ELA, is there any structure that you are familiar with?
So we're using the NVF as well, but I really like the science spin that you're putting on it, because as a STEM teacher, I think we've really focused on the books and the reading, but I love that it can be any activity. So I think that's just my biggest takeaway right now is the video, or in your observation, or in this activity. So we are familiar with NVF though.
So when we go, can you go to slide 12, Ashley? So when we are going back to the structure of the NVF, right? I was trying to write down a few examples of how I would use this. So can you think of a way that you might be looking at the activity that we have done today and see how could you use this structure for writing?
I think starting with something like in our experiment with snails, something like that. So it brings the kids back to the idea of the experiment part.
Right. So one thing that I reflected on is that if we want to, and I think that it's powerful to have titles. So it's important for us to give a name to the activity that we are doing, right? Or even the table that we are using. In the T chart that Rachel was showing, the top title was what snail eat. So that would become our title. But how about the author name? Who is the author of that chart? Who is the author of
the class? The kids were doing it.
Yeah. Isn't that powerful that we are the authors? So
yeah, kids will really connect with that and they'll remember it, not just reading the book. So yeah, I do really think that's powerful.
Yeah, and I can write a sentence like this both by saying the class, the scientist, or you can talk about your partner, Miguel, right? Because in the activity you were, we were divided. There were 2 students on one side of the snail table, 2 students on the other side of the snail table. So you could talk about the other group. And then I think there is here a rich opportunity to use a lot of verbs, right? Depending on the text. So what a picture shows, a table shows. So, and if you go to the next slide, Ashley, right? So that we can enrich. So these are more for narrative. But for instance, when I'm thinking about the T-chart that Rachel was mentioning, you have a compare there that you can use for a T-chart that is a data organizer for this happens or this happens. And then we can finish our sentence. For instance, I wrote in the data table, snails eat food. Our group showed that snails eat a variety of food. So that is a quite, it's quite a beginning of, yeah. And then I think if we want to push it even forward, so this would be the beginning. If we want to push it even forward, one thing that Fred was mentioning and Rachel too, we need to have evidence. If we want to argue, we need to have evidence. So, and what resonated with me when we were doing the investigation, we kept asking, do we see pieces missing? How do we know that they are eating? Are they moving their head? The lettuce is moving. So there needs to be a consensus as a classroom, like scientists would do. How do we define eating for snails? So, but that would be our evidence, because just the fact that they are next to the food, that might not be considered eating.
So what are your thoughts on this NVF process and using it with your first graders?
I have a comment I would share. I guess I teach kind of K-5 with STEAM, but in looking at with the science standards themselves, I really liked how she had that model of the snail and was labeling the body parts, because that is the actual standard for first grade, is how do plants or animals use their external parts to survive or grow. So I could even see this as almost like a sentence frame for a claim. So if we're talking about, in the experiment, what do snails eat? Our class proved would be the verb that snails use their mouths to eat, or
Yes.
something like that. And then bringing it back with, focusing a little on your actual science standards in your argumentative, because we could take this in lots of different places, but to then even really hit your science standards even more, we could kind of frame it a little so it's almost like a claim.
Right, and I dropped again in the chat window the table from the Exploratorium that compares the narrative and the argumentation text types. Because as you were saying, Jesse, one really supports the other. That's why we start often with the narrative, because it's more telling a story. But then we are going into the argumentation because now we have something to argue about. So, and science provides a perfect context, like we have seen today, for both types.
Right. And I would say just the more you know your science standards, because you could even incorporate them with the narrative. So things like, if you're talking from the snail's point of view, I used my eyes to see this, or this is what helped me move along, so that they're just incorporating it in any genre of writing, really.
Yeah. I really also thank you, Fred, for leading the conversation about when reading should happen. That is was also a good reflection point, because we can also bring reading as models for our writing. So we can see how these author of real text are writing about the pictures or are writing about the snail and model it. So definitely there is a lot of use for the scientific text, for the informational text, not only as a way to gather more information, but also to see the structure of a narrative type of text and the argumentation type of text. So that there are different ways to investigate, like I like how you said, investigate into the text.
I thought it was a good idea too to, if students or kiddos want to write their first ideas down and then using the text, and then they can go back and revise with that actual vocabulary, because now they can plug that in where it's appropriate.
And I think, Ashley, you really said a key word there, revise, right? We often don't give students the time to receive feedback so that they can revise it, so that to see really a final polished product.
I'm going to go through that.
Yeah, so there's some example of you could enrich your classroom with the word walls that are movable, so you can offer vocabulary to the students, even in a virtual environment. I do have my word wall.
Yeah, I've been working with a teacher and she has hers right behind her, even though she's at home too. But I think, there we go. Same thing.
Yeah. And any comments that you have about anything today that you might want more information or more support? So I'm going to ask a critical question. How much science are you doing in your classroom? Because we are hearing that it's all about math and ELA, and yet here we are with 50 teachers that want to know more about how to do science in their classroom. So I'm wondering, what type of support do you need? How do you do it?
I'll go ahead and share. I'm actually an instructional coach for elementary in my district, math and science. And I've created kind of like choice boards, teacher. And so it's actually, each choice board is actually a slide deck that can be inserted into their learning management system course. And I've gathered and collected phenomenon in the form of pictures, diagrams, video.
A variety of text.
Yes, and then the children choose which phenomenon sparks their interest, and then they choose an investigation they would like to conduct, and then they choose how they want to tell about what they noticed, what they wondered about the phenomenon, and so on. And I just kind of walk them through the 5E instructional model. And teachers, I make that available to teachers, and then they are using it. I'd say 50% of the teachers at the elementary level actually took that when I offered it and put it in their course, which is a good sign.
Definitely.
Christine, you want to comment?
I was just gonna say, I think especially in this time of virtual learning, kids are just magnets to science. And I think it's super encouraging to see ways that we can use that curiosity and that fun and that excitement to bring in the ELA and bring in the writing, but in a way that kids are really engaged and they don't really realize what they're doing. And especially now virtually, because we just don't have the contact that we have normally. I think it's just super refreshing to see that teachers aren't giving up on science and that they're using that, in fact, as like the engagement piece and then going from there. And our school's a STEM school, so I get to teach the STEM. So our kids are really lucky that we have that as part of their day and the way that we kind of come across in our philosophy of teaching, more of the inquiry-based learning. But I think it's so nice to see teachers here who aren't going to let science just fall away, even though, you know, I know the pressure is real, but it's the way that we can teach it is through science. So it's pretty cool to hear all the conversations.
What district are you in?
I teach in Desert Sands.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
And we have Rosa Gutierrez sharing the chat window that she's a special ed teacher, and I can see using the NVF in my SDC class, and because it's a great tool to use. Scaffolding the students with specific boxes really provide them support for something that is very complicated. But we need to have something that magnetizes them for writing, because otherwise, and you know, I'm not saying that any other good video might excite them, but definitely science, because they're writing about something that they do, is it's topping everything. And Robin also sharing that she got so many ideas on integrating all subjects into this model. Yes. Yeah. Let's get more snails to everybody.
I will say, because we're in a virtual model and students are at home, at least here in Marietta, the focus on local phenomenon,
yes,
bigger, which is nice.
Yes. So, yeah, I guess you can, there are other phenomena. So what I like of Fright in this case is that the exploratory in this case, that the teacher had the materials, right? And then we can ask the students, why don't you try and find a snail somewhere if it's safe for the students to do so? But that is a good approach. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we're supposed to go back to the main room. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.